Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltiziak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. This season, it's all grit. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we hit on a number of Detroit Lions storylines. We finish our Week 18 discussion. We talk roster status, Coach of the Year, coaching interviews, playoff preview, 2025 opponents, and more. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
This is Trevor Nowatzki, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Joining me today is James Cook, the senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle. James, good to have you here.
Always good to be here. Enjoying the Lions being the number one seed in the playoffs for the first time in franchise history.
That it is. First time in franchise history for that. That is a monumentous thing that we are going to talk about. Because joining us to do that is Coach Jerry Angers, the former Michigan High School Coach of the Year and former Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions. He's the current scouting and training director for Bull Rush Sports. Coach, good to have you here with us.
Great to be here talking about the 1-0 Lions.
1-0, number one seed. We're going to get into both of those things after we do some final thoughts from last game. As we get started, I want to thank everyone for listening to the show. Remember, you can find us on Twitter at NTSOL Podcast. All right, guys, final thoughts from last game. There was so much to talk about that last game. A lot of people were surprised. I mean, Coach, I know you saw it coming with Anzalone's return, but even that, I don't think you expected that type of a return. Let's start with the offense, though, first. The Lions put up 31 points, you guys, against the Vikings. And I know the average person's thinking, well, okay, the Lions did that 10 times. What's the big deal? The big deal is the Vikings have only given up 30-plus points 3 times all season. 3. 2 of them to the Lions, and the other one, you guys know?
No. How do I not know that?
Off the top of my head, no.
The Rams.
No.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. They lost right after.
Right. That was their only loss. So all 3 times have been their losses. And so that just goes to show you how impressive, James, this Lions offense was, even when they were held to 10 points in the first half.
The Lions hangover was a real thing, man. Did they play the Rams the week after?
The Vikings did, yeah. But the Lions offense, I mean, putting up 31 points on that defense, Brian Flores has a reputation, and you know what? It's lived up all season, but the Lions have been able to overcome, whatever he's thrown at them and put up 30-some points. Coach, how is it that you see the Lions doing stuff like that? And that's got to just give you so much encouragement, going forward.
Oh, it does. Flores has given up. His defense has given up over 30.7 times in the last few years, and 4 times it was the Detroit Lions. So, I mean, that's one of the things, and again, this year we did it, we've done it twice. And it's the scheme that Ben Johnson, the Lions put together for this, and Jared Goff understanding defenses. I'll touch base real quick. How did they do it? Think about that play, that throw to Jahmyr Gibbs, the touchdown throw to Jahmyr Gibbs with Van Ginkel had to take a man-to-man. Gibbs was lined up wider. Everybody's going over it. Gibbs was lined up wider, which kind of pushed Van Ginkel out. Van Ginkel was outside of the box. And basically the alignment, and then we brought a motion across, of course, a little eye candy, and it identifies if it's man coverage, and that's when Jared Goff picks you apart. There was another play during the game. I don't know if you guys remembered it. Goff checked. The Vikings checked. Goff checked back again. The
yes,
Vikings
he did.
Checked back again, and we had a positive play. So just that chess match, and I think that also comes down, you guys, is the Lions getting out of the huddle with 1 or 2 plays with a lot left on the play clock to where we can play games, moving the pawn, moving the bishop, moving the queen in those chess games. And it comes out at an advantage for us. So that's how they did it. And is it fun to watch?
Coach, I only made it through the first half of watching the game on TV since I've been back. And it was in the first half because the Lions, yeah, you're exactly, I forget, they're yelling kill, kill, kill. And then I forget what they said the second time. It was like, okay, or check, or something, but it was back on. And then I think they killed again, or like, it was a back and forth thing. And you saw the Vikings trying to match that. And you're right. The fact that Jared Goff can read the defense so well puts this offense at such an advantage. And that fourth down touchdown catch by Jahmyr Gibbs, that was a 4th and 2 play. The Lions went for it, and they've shown time and again they're not afraid to throw the ball on 4th down, and that also gives their offense an advantage. James, anything else you want to add on the Lions offense from this last game?
Well, I mean, obviously Jahmyr Gibbs was amazing. But I mean, 4 touchdowns in a game. The only other guy to do that in history, I'm going to imagine you can guess it's Barry Sanders, who also did that against the Vikings.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. And obviously we know his cumulative points put him at 20 touchdowns on the season. And so 20 touchdowns is the most by a Detroit Lions player. He had 16 rushing and 4 receiving. Barry Sanders had 16 rushing, 1 receiving, and Jamal Williams had 17 as well, and his were all rushing. And those are the top touchdown getters in Detroit Lions single season history. But I feel like we buried the lead here. We talked about it, then we went away from it, and that lead was the way this defense stepped up. That red zone defense, talk about it again, right? That they bend but don't break. I mean, think about it. How big of a deal is it when you throw an interception at your own 9-yard line? Or when a guy breaks off a 50-yard run and you tackle him at like your 13-yard line? Most people figure it's going to be a touchdown. But Campbell said this may have been the best defensive game they've played all year. And I've got to say this. 2 other games, the Lions gave up 6 points. So they had 2 other games where the defense did better. But those were not against a 14-2 team, you guys. And so you got to remember the stats against the opponent. The Kansas City Chiefs got shut out last week. Well, we all know why, right? There were so many people not playing. So, Coach, when you see the defense doing this, what does that tell you? And is it repeatable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complementary football again. If offense turns the ball over, defense got to step up. And Aaron Glenn, they've done that year in and year out. We had a game where we threw 5 interceptions, but the defense played pretty well. And is it doable again? Sure it is. I think Aaron Glenn has gotten into a position right now to where he knows his players, he knows what he has. He has the leadership of Anzalone back out there again that can direct him. He's got Campbell, a second-year player, able to run around and make tackles. He's got a cornerback that just stepped up that something about dirt, just a short guy, and he loves this team because they believe in him, and I think that's the biggest thing. So can they do it again? They've had the great red zone defense all year. There were 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. They're always in that top 5. Let's go with that all year. And we've talked about that. You can give up a lot of stats. You can say the defense is terrible because they give up the most yardage. But when you turn 7s into 3s or no touchdowns into 0 points, you're going to win a lot of football games. Can they do this again? Oh, dang right. Long as they stay healthy and they keep bringing back players. But 18, 17 weeks of working on things. Week 18 of fine tuning it, and now it's playoff time, boys. What are you going to get from these guys? Will they do this again? Yes. Will it be as well? Possibly not, because it's the playoffs, but I have a total confidence in this defense.
James, we saw the defense at a level one would argue maybe you haven't seen since week 3 or 4, if at all, this season. And so what did you see out of that, and what elements you think played into this?
Well, normally we're talking about Ben Johnson being the coordinator that's the mad scientist, but I think in this week it was Aaron Glenn. The last couple of weeks, the defensive game plan for the most part, other than a few blitzes here or there with Branch or Iffy, was pretty vanilla. And then this week they just suddenly spring Brian Flores' own defense on the Vikings, basically. I mean, a kind of a version of it, at least, with a lot of blitzes and bringing 5, 6 guys quite a bit. And it really got to Sam Darnold. I was looking at some Vikings posts online and on social media and stuff like that, and before the game they were talking about, franchising and extending Sam Darnold, and now they're totally questioning whether they should bring him back next year even because he kind of got exposed in this game. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, it's one game, um, and everything, but it's just weird how that one game, how they did so much kind of to the Vikings' own opinion of Sam Darnold. And that's totally with Aaron Glenn and getting Anzalone back. I mean, he had to have been planning weeks ahead. Okay, this is what I'm going to do when I get Anzalone back.
Yeah, I mean, they got their quarterback back, right, on the defense. And so he's the one that was able to direct things and help his other teammates up for success. We talked about that. Jack Campbell is great, but he was asked to do something that he wasn't used to doing. So he was taken away from his strength. And so Anzalone coming back, it set all that stuff up. It put it in a perfect chessboard. So we had the perfect defense to go against all those knights and those rooks and whatnot. So another thing coming out of this is something that I want to go back to something what Coach talked about a year ago, James. And that was the Lions had a few weeks to go in the season. And he said, the big thing is we don't want to back into the playoffs. And this year, in many ways, we didn't have a choice. As a fan, I wanted this division clinched 3 weeks ago, okay? I just wanted all the business taken care of. But by that not happening, it kept the Lions playing at an elite level. They had to keep going. And so since that loss to Buffalo, they've reeled off 3 wins in a row, right? The one over the Bears, then the 49ers, and then this dominant one when everything was at stake over the Vikings. So, Coach, let's start with you. I mean, that's almost like the same blueprint they laid down last year at the end of the regular season. We didn't want that Buffalo loss because it meant we didn't clinch the division earlier, but also they needed that bad taste in their mouth because they hadn't tasted that since, September. So how are you seeing the way this season finished off for them, the regular season?
I think this all goes back to the 9-8 season. Okay. We knew before that final game we weren't in the playoffs, but we still went in on the road and won a big game. That's what the staff does. That's what these guys are all about. I heard one guy today says sometimes you got to get punched in the mouth to taste the blood, and I think the Lions did with Buffalo. I love that line. It was one of the guys, the talk show host. But I think that's one of the things that you look at, that they no matter as things were going wrong, even in that game the other day. We had 10 points. Again, we go back to the field goal right before halftime was a key play. But I never felt in that game we were going to lose. The Buffalo game, you sat there and going, man, I don't know if we can stop him, and I don't think we can do that. And I think Campbell talking about week in and week out that this is playoff season right now. This is playoffs. That's their mentality. I don't know if their mentality doesn't start week 1 as this is playoffs. I mean, even after the Tampa loss, I think that was another one where they're going, well, we lost, we got bad taste, let's go. And then we reeled off 11. So it's so much fun to watch because as fans now, which we've always been in a situation where we've said to ourselves, oh my God, how are they going to lose this game? Now we're just like, it's going to be fun to watch how they win this one. And so I think it's the playoff things. And when a team's back is against the wall, a hungry Lions back against the wall, whatever you want to look at, man, they come out fighting. And that's what our Detroit Lions do.
That is exactly it. And, James, one of the things that goes along with this, I want to hear your thoughts on that. But also, we talked last show about how we wanted the Lions. We thought it was essential for them to get up early. And they went up 7-0. They didn't go up much, but they went up early. And they kind of forced the Vikings to play the Lions game. And you saw the Vikings do things that they haven't been doing all season. So weigh in on that and those other points you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, that's always good to get out in front. I mean, Jerry will tell you that as a coach, you never want to play from behind. But looking back at the Buffalo game, I think that was a good thing for the Lions in different ways than we've already talked about in previous episodes. In that Week 18 meant something. Imagine if the Lions had won that game, then Week 18 wouldn't meant anything. Week 17 would have been kind of borderline, and you go into the playoffs having not and you get the number 1 seed, and you go into the playoffs having not played a meaningful game for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
That's dangerous.
Yeah, that really is. And that's why, I mean, some teams were resting players in the whether they had clinched or even if stuff was at stake, some teams were resting players this week. And the Lions didn't have to worry about over resting anybody. And you're right, it could have been a 2 to 3 week thing. And we saw that last year in the playoffs where some teams were doing that, and there was a lot of question about it. And so the great thing was it kept the Lions playing for everything, put everything on the line, things at stake. And that's when you see how you can react and how you handle those situations. And coach, nobody bats an eye when the Lions go for it on fourth down. And the nobody really, I mean, you can talk about the fans and the commentators, but it's really got to be the players and the player mindset. We saw the Vikings doing it, but if that's not your mindset and that's not your character, it's almost you're trying to ask somebody else to do something they're not used to. Your chances of success are a lot lower if you haven't been doing it for 17 weeks.
Oh, for sure. And I think the Vikings, we can use that as a practice thing for the Vikings for the playoffs too. Now they have it on tape. Now they realize that they can't finish. But the mindset of Lions is we got 4 downs, guys, and it doesn't matter where we're at. We've talked about that year in and year out, through the last couple of years, and it's all they're always strategically setting up things, whether it's the fourth down plays or whether it's a game they're playing in, right? We go back and let's talk about that. San Francisco, we should have rested them. No, San Francisco beat us last year. We had to, that was a mindset. That was a thing where you don't want to go into the playoffs, even though San Francisco's not in it, and say to yourself, could we have beat them or should we have beat them? Now that they've checked that off their box, they've checked that off and said, we beat San Francisco. We beat the Cowboys. We beat the teams, that have beaten us in the past. And those are all, it makes your shoulders a little bit bigger when you walk into a football game, guys. And you know that. I mean, it's the positivity within this program is nonstop with, they don't really have a lot to look back on negatively because they don't even care about that. Next man up.
For sure. And again, that just talked about building the character of the Detroit Lions team. And you know what? The Minnesota Vikings, we'll talk about them here later on. They probably learned a lot themselves that game. And I know that coaching staff is going to make some adjustments before they go into Los Angeles. All right, guys. Earlier this week, Coach Campbell met with the media. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
Our fans, they play a factor in that. They played a factor the other day, and it's hard to communicate, and it's, you can feel it in there, and we appreciate it. And I do believe it really is an advantage. It's a home field advantage, and not everybody gets it, and we do. And I'm glad we earned that. So fired up for us, fired up for the fans. We get 2 more here, so that's exciting. It's just a hell of a win. Proud of the guys. It's not easy to do. Mentioned the other day, you get back-to-back division wins. We got the 1 seed, so we knocked out 2 of our goals this year, and we got 1 more to go.
All right, let's start with that first point he brought up, which was the home field advantage, the environment. James, you and I were at that game. We talked about it briefly before. Few thoughts. What was your observation, and how would you compare that to some of your other experiences at Ford Field?
I mean, it was obviously a great experience at that game. The environment there was electric. All those stereotypical words you use to describe that, but I mean, it was just crazy. I know the Lions on social media took some heat for some accusations of some fans not being behaved very well, but some of those just didn't look legit. One was completely fabricated. One of the videos that they used for evidence of that, it was the guy singing the Lions fight song, and they said that he was calling the lady next to him a fat something, and it's completely not what he was doing. He was singing the Lions fight song at her from 6 seats away or something. But I don't know if you saw the tweet from Dan Graziano from ESPN. He was at the game and he talked about the atmosphere there, and he just said they have the cringiest post-touchdown song in the league, which is really saying something, but I'm sold. I don't see how anyone comes in and wins there.
I did see that, yeah. And, to the comments on a couple of things, I don't think there's a fan base in sports at any level that doesn't have somebody in there doing something that's inappropriate. I've seen it everywhere I've been, for home and away crowds everywhere. It is unfortunate. I wish it didn't happen. But it does not tell the story of the entire fan base. I think that's important to remember. And Dan Graziano, I love that cheesy fight song. I love it, love it, love it. I know it's cheesy. I don't care that it's cheesy. Maybe that endears me to it more. Maybe it's because I've heard that song forever. So it was a great environment. It is a great home field advantage. And, you know, we've seen Ford Field transform. You've seen it multiple times this year as well, Coach. You've also heard it through the TV. Your thoughts on that home field advantage and what it means for the Lions?
Well, and I think they use it right. Okay, the baby cam, the Eminem, show Eminem. The crowd's gonna go bonkers when Eminem's shown. Hutch screaming on the sidelines. Barry Sanders. They use the crowd and the behind the scenes people with the cameras and the music and the loud and the third down signs and stuff like that. The light show. It's just they're so smart, and it's not just the X's and O's of football. It's the X's and O's of bringing the crowd into the game. And I think that's what it is. The players thank those guys, thank the crowd. How many on a hand can you say where a player talked about after a game or a coach talked about after a game and did not talk about our fans, home or away? And so that's, the Chiefs and those guys are the elite home crowds. But I got to believe Ford Field's number one right now. And it's not going to go down, not in the next couple home games.
No, exactly. And you're right that they are smart about it, that they calculate a lot of stuff. I remember being at the Tampa game last year, and it was a close game, and my friend's like, where's Eminem? Where's Eminem? I'm like, it's too early. They're going to wait and use it later. And they used it later. And like you said, we talked about this last episode. They showed Hutch at the perfect time. The crowd went crazy. Minnesota had to punt like a play or two later. So, James, what did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and they know when to get the crowd into it. They get them. They've made the crowd feel a part of the game. They have the counter on the scoreboard of how many false starts and delay of games penalties they attribute to the crowd over the season. And I think the counter went up to 17 this week, or hit 17. In their 8 home games. And they just do all that kind of thing. The little bracelets, things that light up that go with the music. That I think that just kind of gets the fans more into it right away. The only negative about that, I don't know if you saw Dan Skipper talk about it this week, is he said that the fans get a little too loud when they announce him as reporting eligible.
Yeah, that's been a common theme all season, and even at the end of last season. And so, you will see the quiet signs come up there. But you're right. If there's not a cult hero anywhere, if there is one, it's him for this football team. And so he's obviously a fan favorite, all based on not just what went on in Dallas, but his effort, his attitude, and his desire to succeed. Okay, Campbell also talked about they got the Division I, the 1 seed. They've got some of their goals down, but they got another one to go. So let's take a look at the roster right now. The health of the roster, we got an update earlier in the week. We won't know much more or fully know better until next week when we do a preview show. But David Montgomery is expected to potentially be back for their next playoff game. Terrion Arnold and Zeitler are not as bad as feared, is what Campbell said, but he doesn't know yet on what their status is for next week. He did say O'Connor, they don't think they have good news on him. And then he was asked about Barnes and Carlton Davis and Hutch, and he put all of them in the same category and said they all have season-ending injuries. Those guys are all done. Now, you've heard rumors here and there of maybe Davis can come back for the championship game, maybe Barnes can, Hutch could maybe come back for the Super Bowl. Campbell did say, and he said this for a while, I'll never bet against Hutch. But in his eyes, Hutch is done for the year. So, James, I want to have you weigh in on all this information, and then I'm going to pass it over to Coach.
Yeah, probably. I think the Carlton Davis one, I think the fans may be scratching their heads on that one a little bit. But I think that the thing you have to take into it is, he broke his jaw. So his jaw has been wired shut for weeks. He's going to lose weight like crazy. I've had that. I got in a car accident, broke my jaw. you lose so much weight because when you're on a liquid diet, you cannot consume enough calories and you just lose a bunch of weight. And so for him to get back to where he was is going to be incredibly difficult in that shortest span of time once they take the wires off and uh and get him back in the action. So I think that's the reason why Carlton Davis is not going to be able to play. And then we know about Hutch and Barnes. I mean, Barnes had knee surgery, and everybody saw Hutch's injury. I mean, that was brutal. But um, again, you never know. He promised, sort of.
For sure. And you had another one to add to this list as well, I think.
Oh yeah, Emmanuel Mosley is done for the season. They put him on the non-football injury illness list, which is the same thing they put Mahogany on at the beginning of the season. When you put him on at the beginning of the season, they have to miss 8 weeks. You put him on that during the season, they have to miss 4. So by virtue of the Lions securing the number 1 seed, they don't have 4 games left. It's games, not weeks. So
Okay.
so he's done. If they had to have played from the 5 seed and gotten to the Super Bowl, yeah, then he could have played in the Super Bowl or something. But so that's not an option for them from either. But I think that makes Rakestraw a good candidate to come back from injured reserve especially if they're not going to be saving them for Carlton Davis and Barnes, that they'll probably use one on Rakestraw.
Makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Coach, what are you seeing on the health of the roster? What encouragement do you have about this as things stand right now, even though we don't know all the information?
Well, I think, the big thing is that, Campbell had made the statement, we worry about the people who are here and not worried about the people who are not. And I think that's why I think he was tired of answering those questions about Hutch and about, CD. And I think he just got to the point, listen, we're in the playoffs right now. I don't want to, don't bring that up anymore. They're not playing, and if they end up showing up, Monty was not playing. Monty is healthy now. You know what I'm saying? So, and I think those are the positives where the team still sees these guys working hard. The team still sees these guys trying to get back and trying to help them out. And they'll use them, going back to what we were just talking about how they use certain positions and certain things in the stands. They're going to use that same thing within the locker room. And the other thing is too, here's your rally cry for your DBs. Here's your rally cry for hey, let's do this for CD. Let's do it for him. Let's pick our brother up. And it's just all good stuff. And basically let's focus on what's in front of us, and that's the playoffs.
That makes a ton of sense, Coach. And the other thing that isn't even talked about here, but we should mention, is Alex Anzalone. He's not even brought up on this, which means he made it through the game. He played well. And I did hear him on the St. Brown podcast. He talked about how much pain he was through the next day and even days after that. But the fact that it seemed like everything went well without any setbacks, and now we have the bye week. That's the other thing, too, is nobody's 100% once week 1 happens or whatever. So everybody's getting this, especially because we know how early the Lions' bye was. This is going to be huge for everybody on the team. So, all right, we're going to take a break from the roster. We'll get back to some of that and look at the playoff stuff. Let's talk about Coach of the Year and coaching interviews. All right, 2024 NFL Coach of the Year. A lot of people were saying Kevin O'Connell and Dan Campbell were in like a dead heat, and it was going to come down to the last game. Others have mentioned some other people that are great candidates. Of course, that award has not been given out officially. Others have given it out. Different entities have. James, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on NFL Coach of the Year? Are there 2 or 3 guys that you see in the final running? Do you think Dan Campbell is simply the winner at this point? What are your thoughts and what have you heard?
I think he's got to be the front runner right now. O'Connell, I think, was right there neck and neck with him. And that Week 18 game, I think, would separate Campbell from O'Connell in pretty much any race, unless the Vikings do way better than the Lions in the postseason to get him to catch back up. The Lions simply outcoached the Vikings in that game. They outplayed them too, but they really outcoached them. And the Pro Football Talk just named their Coach of the Year, and it was Dan Campbell. which is kind of says something because Mike Florio hasn't exactly been a friend of the Lions this season so far.
He wasn't a fan of the Lions last year. I was at the Tampa playoff game and trying to get Chris Sims to tell Florio to belong in them. So that does say something. You know, Dan Quinn, Sean Payton are both a couple guys that are considered candidates as well for Coach of the Year. Coach, talk to us. What do you see out of this? And let me hear your thoughts.
Well, I mean, I think Dan Campbell's been coach of the year the last 3 years. So, but it gets to a situation on some of those is who they like or who they don't like, or do they like the guy or are they jealous of the guy? I mean, some of that stuff. I go back to last year with Hamler not getting comeback player of the year. And that just I'm still frustrated about that one. A guy that actually died on the football field and came back and suited up again. And they gave it
DeMar
to
Hamlin, yep.
Yes, and they gave it to a guy who was laying on a couch and became a quarterback again. So some of those things drive me crazy. We can talk about our safety. Oh my God, how does he not get on well because people don't like him? And so, I think long as us and the fans and if he doesn't get it, it's just going to make our crowd louder. So don't give it to him, please. I mean, because our crowd's going to, should be coach of the year. I can see that going across the billboard in the third quarter on a third down play where we either have to get a defensive stop, and I see them popping up. Dan Campbell finished second and coach of the year, and the crowd goes ballistic. So we'll do with it what we do with it. But as far as I'm concerned, he's the best coach in that, and he should get coach of the year.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where depending the way they do this, it's always the most surprising team or the most unexpected. Kevin Stefanski won it last year. And I think a lot of people said it's because he navigated so many injuries on that Cleveland team. Well, we know a thing or two about injuries in Detroit. And I don't want to say I'm sorry, but maybe I'm sorry. But if that wasn't a masterpiece that Dan Campbell, Aaron Glenn, and Ben Johnson and company put together in Week 18 with everything on the line, a game where everybody on ESPN said the Vikings were going to win, like, what more could you ask for? I mean, I've made the argument that the Lions needed to make the playoffs 2 years ago when they went 9-8 for Campbell to get the coach of the year because they were the unexpected team. Why didn't they get it last year? Because people expected them to be good. They won the division. Okay, fine. They expect them to be good this year, but they've done it despite all the injuries. They set a franchise record for number of wins. They tied for the most wins in the NFL, and it wasn't like a 13-win season, best wins. We're talking 15 wins. So he's my coach of the year. I felt like he's coach. I'm right with you. I think he should have had it 3 years in a row pretty much. And the other thing is, as we've talked about on the show, it's a team award. They're going for that trophy and some rings. If they get this, it's nice. If they don't, it's going to fuel them and the crowd. James, any final thoughts on Coach of the Year?
No, not really. I mean, other than that, I think it should be Dan Campbell. Like Jerry, I'm fine if they don't because he'll just use it as so much more motivation. Another guy I think that is almost one of those guys that we forget about because he does so well every year is Andy Reid.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
They won 15 games this year without any wide receivers, basically.
And without
Their
playing
wide
the last
receiver
game.
room was our linebacker room.
For sure. Yeah, and they didn't even try to win the last game. I mean, well, they tried to win, but you know what I mean. Yeah, Andy Reid's just that consummate professional with that. So, all right. And you know what? As we already know, Campbell's not the kind of guy that is after that award. That's why he's the right coach. Speaking of coach, there's coaching searches going on. Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn have interviews set up this week. The really good news is they have to get all their interviews in this week. And then as we prepare for the opponent next week, no interviews. Teams cannot talk to them until the season's over. Conversely, a year ago, they were interviewing during their after their first week of the playoffs as they were getting ready for the second week, and it was taking time away. So, James, break down, and it's not just Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn. Break down what you've got, what interviews have been set up as far as we know.
Yeah, well, Ben Johnson has interviews with the Patriots, Raiders, Jaguars, and Bears. Aaron Glenn has interviews with the Jets, Jaguars, Bears, Raiders, and Saints. So interestingly, that the three of those openings, Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson are going head to head. The Bears fans seem dead set on Ben Johnson. Like they're gonna be villagers with the torches. If the Bears don't hire Ben Johnson, it seems like they are dead set on him. Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach, also has an interview on Friday with Seattle for their offensive coordinator position, and then I think you had Chris Spielman also has an interview.
Yeah, Chris Spielman, number 54, the man, the special assistant, is interviewing for the New York Jets GM position. And if I'm not mistaken, his brother is helping sort some of that stuff out. And that's a real interesting one. Obviously, we don't want to lose any of these guys, okay? I don't think anybody wants to. But we got two options here, folks. You either are a really good team and you lose coaches, or you're a really bad team and you fire coaches, okay? You rarely live right in the middle there. And so this is the way it goes. And, I'm not excited for it. I love what Campbell said about Aaron Glenn. He says, if nobody else wants him, I'll have him, but I'll be surprised if he doesn't get a chance. So, Coach, James laid this out. A year ago, everybody thought Ben Johnson was gone. Nobody really thought Aaron Glenn was gone. This year, do you have an opinion? Do you have a thought? Or where are you on all this stuff?
Well, I mean, again, when you're successful, people are going to try to steal that success and copy it and bring it into their building. And, I think that's a positive flag, whatever you want to call it, on Dan Campbell and his staff and what he's put together. And it's also a great sign when people are trying to steal your assistants, because that they're the best of their business and they want to know what that locker room, how can we turn our locker room into what you guys have done? Well, it's going to be tough. It's not Dan Campbell. It's the assistants, and the assistants will learn to ton from. I look at it, if AG heads out, God bless him. And I want him back too, but I agree. I think he deserves to be a head coach somewhere. He's been in the league long enough. He's a leader of men. And that turns our linebacker coach into our next DC. Not going to hurt us one bit, because AG's been working on him. Now, if AG leaves and he takes Shep, then I'm going to be really upset. But so and I'll, whatever team AG goes to, that'll be my second favorite team. I mean, I think that highly of him. Same thing with Ben Johnson, and it's a good sign. But I still think I don't worry about that. It's sort of like, is this player coming back or that player coming back? Are these coaches leaving? Is that coach not leaving? We have them right now. Go win the Super Bowl. We'll fret and worry about that afterwards. And I don't see as many of these guys leaving as posted on interviews. I just see them wanting to stay here.
Well, and that's the thing too. They've got to have the right offer, the right situation, and be selected. All those things need to align, James.
Yeah, I think that's going to be part of it. I mean, you saw last year how Ben Johnson was selective. He offered a couple of jobs basically, and said no. He wants the right situation. I'm gonna guess Aaron Glenn's going to be picky too. What is there, 6 openings for head coaches right now in the NFL? Any of those teams good? Any of those teams close? Any of those teams have a large pool of players that are already locked up for a long time that are in their prime still? And, not really. So I don't know that these are considered attractive places for them to land. To an extent. I mean, the Bears obviously have players in place. The Jaguars have players in place, but there's also something wrong with those franchises that needs to be fixed before they're going to be good. Just kind of like what the Lions did, where they reset everything.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the way it's going to be almost anytime you go somewhere for a head coaching position. Coach, what are some of your thoughts on this?
Well, that's, and the other thing too, you got to think about, I'm going to throw out 3 more names: Ryan, Vrabel, Carroll. Those 3 guys that people are looking at too. If they're going to go, here's the thing is, if a franchise is going to go, they want to go to these younger coaches because, they've developed all these great schemes and different offenses, different defenses. Then you're going to go with one of those young guys. But then from there, do you have Brad Holmes as your general manager? and I'm going to say that, because that has a lot to do with it too. So that's the right fit for these guys. Are they going to have somebody like Brad Holmes, and they're going to want to develop they're going to go into a situation where everybody has a voice, just like the Detroit Lions. How many times has Campbell said, "Hey, what did you? I didn't make that decision. We made that decision." And the we is the key. Me doesn't do us any good. We is the thing. So that's what I see with that. And right now, those guys are all sitting in this beautiful setup with the Detroit Lions. And the other thing is too, Miss Hampton Ford up there is sitting back going, "Oh, they're going to interview. How much are they paying you?" There's no salary cap on coaches, guys. So just keep filling it. I raise the ticket prices. I don't care. Just pay the dang coaches to stay.
Raise the ticket prices. Right. Cable raised their prices this January for everyone across the state. So, well, all right, Coach, you said your second favorite team will be the one that Aaron Glenn coaches. James, you said you didn't see this happening, but I got to ask, both of these guys had interviews or have interviews with the Chicago Bears or being requested. Do you think there's a chance that they would take that Bears job and go up against Dan Campbell twice a year? Does that even play a thought into that from your perspective? And then, Coach, I want to hear from you as well.
I think it does for sure. Both of those guys love Dan Campbell. He, helped make them into what they are now, helped them get them in that position where they're getting head coaching job interviews and offers. So I don't think either of those guys will go to the Bears. I think there's a better chance that they're just doing some recon on the Bears than that they take that job.
Interesting. All right. Well, and Coach, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Eli Manning, part of the reason he wanted to be in New York and not the Chargers is he wanted to be in the NFC and keep his brother in the AFC. If that is a true story, but you want to avoid that conflict. Does this matter if it's, your mentor, or does it matter to leave the division or stay in the division?
I think there's a couple. I agree with James on that. I don't see either one of those guys going to the Bears. I think he said the relationship, and I think the relationship is huge. And if that was a divided staff, or they're tired of Dan Campbell taking credit, or they're tired of Dan Campbell, saying it's his team, and then, you're going to go to the Bears because you're going to come back and beat them and go, "I guess it was me and not you." But we don't see that amongst the staff. They're brothers. I got best friends all over the place. I don't know if I'd ever, want to get into a league. Part of it would be, I want to get in a league to beat them, so I'd bragging rights at Christmas dinner. But I just don't see. I agree with James on it. I don't see those guys going to the Bears.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to keep an eye on all this, and that also tells us the importance of now, right? And you saw the Buffalo Bills lose some of their coordinators. How does that affect that team? There is some adjustment that takes place. Now, I'm not concerned, like you said, Coach, right? We got other guys that are being prepped up, coaches in waiting. Dan Campbell wants everyone around him to succeed. He's always setting people up for the next step. And perfect example is, a couple of years ago when they went 9-8, they made the offensive coordinator position change before that, and what they did, and they elevated Ben Johnson, and Campbell's the coach. He can be a play caller. He can help select people for the right position. So it'll be something to keep an eye on, something we haven't been in a while, because, I don't think any head coach other than I think Dick Duran, who was an interim coach for a hot minute. Otherwise, no former Detroit Lions head coach has ever gone on to be a head coach in the NFL again. Darrell Bevell got a couple looks. He was an interim coach for a hot minute as well. I think he's interviewing for a coordinator position right now, actually. Quick on Chris Spielman. I listened to a podcast this summer where his brother interviewed him, and the Lions actually were interested in Chris Spielman for the GM position. They talked to him about that, and he was like, "Oh, I'm not qualified for that." And this was a few years ago, right? So obviously he has learned since that time, and he has grown. But that'll be interesting to keep on. You love the man's heart. You love everything he's brought to this team and this franchise. So from the selfish standpoint, I hope he stays. Whether he stays or elevates, I'm still wearing his number 54 jersey when I go to football games. That's not going to change. So, okay, as we talked about, enjoy now. This has been an historic season for the Detroit Lions. 15-2, best record in franchise history, took that best record to get the division title and the number 1 seed, James. Drop some nuggets about this historic season and what it's meant to you.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I was looking, Yahoo released their mock draft for 2025. And, it said in the headline, like, they had the Lions taking edge rusher to pair with Hutchinson, which is kind of a no-brainer and everything like that. But I had to scroll so far to get to that pick because they had the Lions picking at number 32 in that draft. I think they're just going on the basic seeding, of what the playoffs are now.
Sure.
But they had the Chiefs picking 31, and then I think the Eagles before that and the Bills before that. So, those are your top 4 ranked teams in the playoffs and everything like that. But the farther and farther I scrolled down there, I just kind of got more and more of a smile on my face. I'm used to never having to scroll far in these things.
Well, yeah, and you know who's caused a lot of us to scroll on Twitter and stuff is the Detroit Lions PR team, okay? They have had to put up so many things about records they're breaking. I made a comment that I thought we broke all the records last year. Like, how are we breaking more records? And so their offense, you guys, every team in NFL history that has scored more points than the 2024 Detroit Lions, there are just 3 of them. The 2013 Denver Broncos, the 2007 New England Patriots, and the 2018 Kansas City Chiefs. And so that talks about the type of offense the Lions have put together. Now, I don't think all those teams won the Super Bowl those years because defense also played a role, but we've also seen our defense elevate this year. And our biggest weakness from last year, the secondary, has become a very solidified force throughout this season. And so, Coach, after you talk, we're going to start talking playoffs. We're going to start talking 1-0. We're done celebrating, okay? This is our 6 hours of celebration because it's the end of the regular season. Just reflect a little bit on this. We'll do a real reflection when everything's over. But, how awesome of a season has this been so far?
No, it's just unbelievable, from the coaching standpoint. I'll tell you how I really reflected was on Tuesday when I was up training some guys up in Marquette. And one of the trainers that's up there, we're in the UP, right? Probably 70% Packer fans and 30% Lion fans or something like that. And I was talking to one of the trainers. I said, hey, who's your favorite team? He said the Packers. I said, oh, figures. I said, when are you going to come over to the Lions? And he said to me, he goes, I'm going to tell you something. He goes, I'm a huge Packer fan, but I am rooting for Dan Campbell. He goes, I love his talks. I love what he's doing with this team. You don't get that very often from especially a Packer fan or a Viking fan or a Bears fan. But
right.
for him to say that kind of put the dot on the I for me or across the T that we're in the right trajectory upward. And there's teams that will be pulling for us if their team gets eliminated.
Speaks volumes about your coach. And, I have relatives who are fans of other teams, and they're not fans of the head coaches. And so they see things that aren't going so perfect, even if the teams are having some success. I don't want to say we're spoiled, but it maybe feels like it because, you could say, we're not spoiled because we had to endure for so long. We're finally, seeing fruits of labor and the hard work that's been put in. But you're absolutely right, Coach. We've got an amazing coach, and all levels, everything combined has really created this. I think I may have talked about this a year or two ago where it's almost like that hit TV show. When you get it, you keep it together as long as you can because you don't always know how lightning's going to strike, and sometimes it doesn't strike a second or a third time. And we've seen the Lions lock up a lot of their key players saying, we're going to keep as many of these guys together. And that's why I appreciate Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson coming back for another season as they did this year. I do hope Glenn gets that head coaching position somewhere because that's what he wants, it seems. But like Campbell, I'd love to have him back. Okay. It's playoff time, you guys. The Lions are not playing this week, but they are preparing. They're resting some players. They're doing a lot of resting, but they are doing practices. They're doing some walkthroughs. I think Dan Campbell said it perfectly. He wants to keep the engine idling, okay? And this goes back, James, to what you brought up as well, is they had to keep going all those last weeks of the season. It wasn't take a break and have a big lull. So They did what they needed to do. It's like they're on a bye week, and so you've got that a little extra rest time, and so keep that engine idling. Can you keep them going? Now, from a coach's standpoint, they're not going to prepare for all the different opponents they could possibly face. All right. In the NFC right now, Green Bay will be playing Philly. Washington, that's the 7 against the 2. Washington against Tampa, that is the 6 against the 3. Minnesota against the Rams, that's the 5 against the 4. The Lions will either play Green Bay, Washington, Minnesota, or the Rams. 4 possible different opponents. The Lions have already played Green Bay, Minnesota, and the Rams. Green Bay twice, Minnesota twice, Rams once. And so everybody but Washington in that group. But I like what Campbell said. He goes, we're not going to prepare for all these people. He goes, we're going to rest. We're going to let these coaches rest so they have everything to give next week and they're on a full tank of gas and they're all tuned up and ready to go. Coach, from your standpoint of preparing, you like that mindset and what advantages does that give your staff once next week arrives?
I think clear their head. We've already talked about the interviews. These are all things that, hey, go out and do what you got to do. Take care of family matters. Take care of in-house matters. Take care of rest. Take care of, what do you want to do? You go into a podcast, do different things like that. But when we come back, it's full bore. Our foot's on the pedal and we have to go. I love it. I think it's, everything Dan Campbell and them. I go back to Smith, when he signs and he gives them that week off. That's why people want to work and do stuff for Dan Campbell and play for him, because this staff is going. Do we prepare for who we might play? Again, why put all that in there? Now there'll be some nuggets. I'm sure they're looking at some film. They're going to watch each and every one of those games because that's the easiest way to watch it, because now you get to see it live, listen to the broadcasters, and you can take notes and stuff down like that. We have faced some of the other ones. So how much is that going to change? And who are the new ones going to be if we do play them? So, I just like it. I think you don't want to get into that situation. I've done that in the past coaching where, oh my God, we're going to scout this team and scout this team. And then we turn around and they get upset in week 1 going into the playoffs. And we just wasted, energy. And so they'll be well rested coming into when it counts.
Well, I think you said it right there. Wasting energy, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't spread yourself thin when you don't have to. Be prepared to be successful in the thing you want. James, your thoughts on the preparation, and then I think you have some thoughts on the AFC side before we go a little deeper into the NFC.
Yeah, well, you guys were talking about the motor and keeping the motor going, and they're going to get a little extra fuel for that motor too in their week off in David Montgomery. So that's just one more weapon that they're going to have again on offense when they play next week after a nice week off, and hopefully they get Zeitler back. Hopefully they get Terry Arnold back, and those other guys that had just come back in the last couple of weeks have another week or two underneath them and play even better. So we saw that how it took a couple of weeks for guys like Pascal and Levi to kind of get their legs under them, and then the last week or two they've been pretty good.
So what do you see coming out of the AFC side of things?
The AFC side is, everybody's predicting, Buffalo, Kansas City in the AFC Championship. But I think that in the first round, the Bills got the worst possible opponent that they could have gotten out of those playoff teams for them.
Really?
Which is Denver. Denver's defense matches up with their offense perfectly. Buffalo uses a lot of the 4x1 passing concepts that you see a lot of teams start using more and more now this year. I think 12 of the 14 teams in the playoffs use that, where it's Jerry knows a bunch of probably more about this than I do, but it's where you put guys in motion, you end up with 4 guys bunched on one side and 1 guy out on the other. And the Lions do it a lot where they'll throw a short screen pass and then they've got 3 wide receivers blocking for the guy. And a lot of NFL teams are doing this a lot, but the Broncos, the Bills do it maybe the most, and the Broncos defend it the best.
Well, that will be interesting to keep an eye on because they are 8-point underdogs. The Broncos are. The Steelers are 9.5 against the Ravens, and then the Chargers and Texans are a 3-pointer. So thanks for that insight there, James. Coach, any thoughts you have on the AFC, really briefly?
Well, I agree with them for sure on the Broncos. The Broncos are scary. You got Sean Payton as their head coach. The guy, he's going to screen you to death. And the difference between when we played them and what the Broncos are playing them is defense. And James already alluded to that. They have the bodies, they have the defensive DC that can offset some of those things. Josh Allen, I think, is going to have his cape. He's going to have his cape on to win this game. I just see, I see some things happening right there and again, the Broncos remind me of the Detroit Lions because Sean Payton and Dan Campbell, Dan was worked under him and so did AG. That tough, hard nose. We're going to find your weakness and we're going to pick on it until you can stop it. And so I agree. I think that's the toughest matchup. And then you go to let's go out and talk about the Ravens and the Steelers. I think Lamar is 2-4 against the Steelers, and it doesn't look like Zay Flowers is playing. And so I think that's going to be a big hitter. It's going to, the Ravens are loaded. There's no doubt about it. But the Steelers, it's when you're playing somebody a couple times a year, you know how that turns out. You never want that matchup. And that's an interesting one too. So I think those are the two biggest games that it'll be. It won't be a total shock if the underdog wins.
All right. Well, and I tell you, the Ravens Steelers, I mean, yeah, they play each other tough. And so I recently looked at, the last game they played, it wasn't so close. The first one it was. I recently looked at Lamar Jackson's stats for this year, like 41 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, like thrown. Like they are eye popping. I did not realize they were so good. And so, yeah, well, it'll be interesting to keep an eye on the AFC side of things. Let's jump to the NFC because this is where it's going to get real exciting, folks. I am happy the Lions are sitting this weekend out because the NFC is loaded. We talked about Green Bay, the 7 against Philly, the 2, Washington, the 6 on the road against Tampa, the 3, then Minnesota, the 5 at the Rams, the 4. Now, quick reminder, last year there was only one upset in the first round, but it was the number 7 Packers beating the number 2 seed Dallas. The rest of it went chalk. If we go to the year before, the number 6 New York Giants went into Minnesota and beat the number 3 seed Minnesota Vikings, and the number 5 Cowboys beat the number 4 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, James, let's get started with you. What are some things you're seeing or thinking about this first round of the NFC playoffs?
Interesting thing about that Giants Vikings thing is that Daniel Jones was the quarterback that year, and now he's on the Vikings as their backup quarterback. So maybe they're insuring against that happening again. But yeah, I all of these wild card games in the NFC, I could totally see the road team winning these games. You're gonna have Philly's gonna have Jalen Hurts having not played in a couple of weeks. Washington is doing real well, has nothing to lose, has a young quarterback who just likes to sling it all over. Terry McLaurin is having an amazing season. And we know about the Vikings. I wouldn't be surprised if they go in and beat the Rams. There could even be some lag in the Rams and what's going on in California now with the wildfires. They're talking about maybe moving this game to a neutral site because of that. The game could end up being played in Arizona.
Yeah, there's a lot to look at here. The Packers and Eagles play on Sunday and then afternoon, and then the Commanders and Buccaneers play Sunday night. If Green Bay and or Washington, if both of those teams lose, if Philly and Tampa win, the Lions will automatically be playing the winner of the Minnesota-LA Rams game on Monday night. So we'll know that come Sunday night. If either Green Bay or Washington win, then we know the Lions would play whichever of those teams wins because that would be the lowest seed. Coach, I agree with James. I see most of these games going any way you look at it. The Packers and Eagles seems to have the biggest spacing. So what are you looking at out of these NFC games?
Well, Packers-Eagles game is interesting. 34-29 week 1, right? They played each other week 1.
Yeah.
Watson's out, so that's going to hurt a little bit. Go back to what James said. Hurts hasn't played a game in 3 weeks. Okay, he is coming back off a concussion. the argument today on the sports show was, are they going to run him? Are they not going to run him? That's part of his game, running the football, whether it's the tush push or, his
Yeah.
zone read schemes. And he had only completed, I think, had only thrown 4 passes on the previous game when he played. So really, you're looking at like 4 weeks, something like that, 3-4 weeks. So that's gonna come into play. They know each other because they played week 1. They are both 2 different teams. Love has got a banged up arm. He got hit on the funny bone, so he's having some tingling sensations or something in his fingers, from what they're saying. So I think that's there's a lot of things in that. It is in Philly. The Packers have been taking the hit about being 1-5 in the toughest division. 1-5, hard to believe, but look at the games that they lost: 2 Vikings, 2 Lions, and 1 Eagles. And so you got some pretty good. I think the Packers could outcoach them. I think they got a better coaching staff. That's just my gut feeling, and so we'll see on that. The Vikings game, the Rams game, that's a toss up. Vikings got to be upset. So, you gotta give them some of that. They know that they lost a great opportunity to, sort of like us losing a great opportunity to play on the last week of the season last year. And so you think the Vikings are going to come back. And then, of course, Baker Mayfield, he's had a great year. Nobody's really talked about, well, they talk about it, but everything's Lamar and Josh Allen. Didn't Baker throw for 40 this year? Didn't he have 5 this year in one game? So, and we know him, man. He's a scary human being. And Evans, so there's some good matchups. And I see out of those 3 games, I'm gonna go out on the limb and say 2 of the lower seeds are gonna win those 2 of those 3 games.
Oh, really?
Yep.
All right. And James says he could see all of them winning, obviously any of them winning. Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. I think all of these are going to be really good games. I think all these teams are very capable in the postseason. And so I wouldn't discount anybody. Now, have you guys been getting the same question I've been getting, is who are you rooting for? Who do you want the Lions to face? Have you been getting that one, James?
A little bit, but I don't really care all that much.
All right. Coach, how about you?
I'm the same. For 3 weeks, I watched games and rooted for teams so that we would get the championship earlier, and they all backfired. So we don't care. Dan Campbell doesn't care. The staff doesn't care. The players don't care. It depends. And they probably all have something listed. They probably have all the teams up there, and there's something in there that they're going to use that as a motivational thing, no matter who we play. So, let's go. I mean, and Dan Campbell told Vikings KOC after the game, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Of course, the other teams heard that. Now they're all upset about that. So I think Dan Campbell did that just so people get really upset and they just smack each other hard.
Yeah. I guess, somebody asked me who I want us to play, and I said, be careful what you ask for. That phrase comes back to me time and again. And then last year, before the playoffs, it was all looking like the Lions were going to get the Rams, and I really didn't want that game just because of all the storyline that went with it. But then ultimately I just said, give us who you're going to give us, and we're going to go play the football game, Coach. And we'll take our team against whoever's coming into Detroit, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think that there are a couple teams I hope that we do play. I mean, I should have said that in the first place. I'm sorry. I'm thinking the Kansas City Chiefs or the Baltimore Ravens.
Ah, okay. So I like that. Yes, the team you want to face is an AFC team, because that means we're down in New Orleans in the final game of the season. I like that. I like it when things aren't always chalk, right? It always adds a little intrigue. I mean, we all loved it last year when the Green Bay Packers beat the Dallas Cowboys, because it meant a second home game for the Lions. We don't have to worry about that. Coach, I'm going with you on this thing. I'm not rooting for somebody for us to get a certain matchup. I'm just going to go watch these games because I'm tired of rooting for other teams just a little bit to try and help us clinch something and look at these scenarios and stuff. I'm just going to let the chips fall as they may, and we're going to play the football game in 2 weeks, week and a half. Okay, moving on briefly. The 2025 schedule of opponents is now known. We know who we're going to play and where, kind of, sort of. And we know the home and the road schedule, right? We don't always know. They could put us in an international game. That's always possible. We don't know the when. And I got a text message from my buddy, and he said, the Eagles better win this year because their released teams that they play against next year is gross. And he goes, they play the Packers and Vikings and Buccaneers and Chiefs and Chargers and Bills all on the road. James, I told him that was nothing because what do the Lions got next year?
Yeah, the Lions' road schedule next year is, ooh, doggy. It is something. Rams, Bengals, Ravens, Chiefs, Commanders, Eagles. All playoff teams except for the Bengals, who should have been a playoff team. So, I mean, that is about as difficult of a schedule as I've seen. Their home games a little more manageable, actually, surprisingly. Dallas and the Giants, Steelers, who are still a very good team, Cleveland, who has potential if they can resolve their quarterback problems, and Tampa, who we've talked about quite a bit as being a pretty quality opponent.
Yeah, and so a couple things to keep in mind. One, they're playing a first-place schedule again. We played a first-place schedule this year, you guys, and we went 15-2. That maybe gets overlooked at our record, right? Not to take it away from the Vikings, but I think they played a third-place schedule this year, all right? A first-place schedule in doing that. Some of these games, it's because we just happened to get the other half of the division that wasn't as good. We get them at home versus the road, right? So, Coach, it's just a quick look, and you never know how a team's going to be next year. But the initial thought is, ooh, this looks tough. Hey, I guess it's better to go in looking tough than looking easy and turning tough.
No, for sure. I mean, it is. It's scary. We're on the away at the Ravens. I'm going to that game. I've already going to get booked tickets because it's going to be different than it was 2 years ago. But hey, you look at that away schedule and how tough it is. Maybe there's one or two of those teams that have 21 injuries and 12 or 13 on defense, and they just can't keep winning. So, but we'll see. If we're healthy, bring them all.
There you go. And you know what? There's so many variables, so many things change from year to year. And so we'll just wait and see what happens with that. But final thoughts before we get out of here. It's still the 2024 season, even though we are in January of 2025. Final thoughts, James, before we get out of here.
I got nothing, man. We already had an hour and 15 minutes of final thoughts.
Fair enough. Coach, anything from you?
I don't have any. I got one final thought is James is pretty smart.
That he is. One thing that I'm going to mention before we get out of here, and I should have mentioned it maybe a long time ago, Jahmyr Gibbs, NFC Player of the Month. Here. All right, way to go, Jahmyr Gibbs. Enjoy Wild Card Weekend with no anxiety. Enjoy it for what it is, and we'll look and see who the Lions are going to be playing next week. Coach, James, thank you guys for all the insights, all the banter, all the information. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. You can find more episodes and content at notthesameoldlions.com. Tell your friends and family about the show. Check us out on socials. Please subscribe regardless of your listening platform. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.